Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 326 for Monday, December 2nd, 2024. It is December already. Holy smokes. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, and it's available across all of the major podcasting platforms, including a video version on YouTube. If you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Joel Duggan, and joining as always is my friend Jonny, who you may know as Pixel Riffs on the interwebs. Hello, sir.
Hello, we've been chatting it up about how the weather has been turning and the fact that it's already December and how our routines change. Joel has a lot to say about butternut squash soup, which is guaranteed to make all of you hungry if you want to listen to The Render Distance. That's the extended version of the podcast that our patrons get to listen to. So if you support us on Patreon, you get access to pre- and post-show. There's probably 20 to 30 minutes of extra content every single episode. So if that sounds like something you're into, head over to patreon.com/thespawnchunks and consider supporting us through this holiday season and beyond. It is the first of the month, of course, the first episode of the month at least, so we want to give a special thanks to our patrons for continuing to stick around and help support the show. We have some fun events coming up in the calendar. We've had our monthly Minecraft Hangout for November this last Saturday, so that's available for patrons now. It's in the RSS feed like usual. Lots of people sharing builds, what they've been up to, and a little bit of anticipation for the Pale Garden as well. We are going to be pre-recording some holiday episodes as well, so patrons who get to listen live in the Discord will need to check the announcements channel in the Discord every so often if you want to get the download on when we're going to be doing a couple of extra episodes just to fill out the calendar towards the end of the month when Joel and I take our usual holiday vacation. So there are also some Patreon changes happening in January. There was an episode especially for our patrons about discussing those changes, just how they affect people who are already subscribed. But stay tuned to our Patreon page over at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, because in the new year that's going to be switching over to monthly subscriptions and will hopefully be available from the Patreon iOS app from that point onwards. But like I said, for all of that and more, patreon.com/thespawnchunks.
So what have you been up to in Minecraft this week, my friend?
This week, I have not had a huge amount of time. It's been a very busy end to November and beginning of December for me. I have most of the gateway built that I've been talking about in the Windy City so far, though. Having built that in creative originally, I've now started rebuilding it in survival, in the actual world, as opposed to a creative copy of the world where I was working with it before. I'm doing this as a step-by-step kind of tutorial, but also discussing how I texture stuff and trying to take a more analytical look at the way I deal with color and shape and how that affects certain types of buildings. And this is a build that takes the second of the four approaches that I've tried to outline in this video, which I think are flat color, texture, gradient, and shading. Those are the sort of umbrella terms I've given to each of them. And so this is really an exercise in just texture, and I've sort of gone into why a little bit as well, how like shading is good when you're trying to work with lighting and stuff that is viewed from a distance, but up close it can kind of look a bit like block spam and sort of confusing. You don't really know what you're walking past if the wall is made out of 6 or 7 different types of blocks. And the same goes for gradients. Like, is it meant to look like a smooth transition between colors from a distance, or is it just meant to look like the roof lightens as it catches the sunlight, and how that works with like the light that's present in Minecraft lighting engine versus the light that we imply with all of our block choices. So in this case, I decided to go for more just, I don't want this to be a flat red terracotta block. I want it to have at least some stuff that can highlight and accent some of the choices of building blocks, and there's a bit of exterior detail that adds to that. There's a big copper tank on one side that's clearly feeding something into the other tower, and a few kind of pipes out of exposed or oxidized copper and warped wood, stripped warped wood, to give the impression that there's this sort of aged fuel line going from one tower to the other. But that adds some like cool color into a warm color palette, and I'm thinking a lot about the way shape and color interact with builds like this. So yeah, having fun finally getting a build done in the Windy City. It feels like I've been talking about it for ages, but I've got the ball rolling with this one, and I'm really happy with it so far.
I know we've seen images of this in the creative world as you were planning it and going through those early stages, but it looks fantastic in the world. Like, I think there's something really nice and contextual about seeing the monorail plans going through the middle of it. You can see the function of the building, not just the form of it.
Yeah.
And in relation to what you've got going on, I think also you see the sense of scale with the placement of other buildings around it. The fact that the monorail is already high off the ground, and then this kind of like straddles it. It's kind of like a tuning fork. It goes over the top of it. Mm-hmm. And you can see like just how it's big, but it's not so big that it's gargantuan. Like it fits with the rest of everything going on. And I love that it's so different than anything else that I've seen you do lately. Like I don't remember the last time you built with this color, and I don't remember this sort of style either. And I think that it's just really cool that you've got such a different palette going on. Because like when I think about like wind and those kind of themes, I tend to think lighter colors. So
Yeah.
it's interesting that you're going with such a deep kind of like a red terracotta maroon build. Just so I'm clear, like is this going to be unique in its color, or are there going to be other buildings around it that are in the same sort of like palette range?
I'm sort of going with a mix of stuff, I think. And yeah, we'll get into the other color palettes I have in mind a little later, because we're going to be talking about Pale Oak with the Pale Garden coming up and what we're going to do with that.
Right.
And I think that's definitely going to feature. And I want to do some stuff themed around like the breeze being the new mob, and obviously wind kind of evokes that lighter blue and white color palette. But I think with this, I went into this with the idea that this was a build I wanted to do regardless of the thematic space that the rest of the project occupies, because I had this concept art piece that I finally found after having to track it down via various vague Google searches until I could find it, that I'd been working from ages and ages ago, back when 1.17 just came out. And so I wanted to revisit that as a project, but actually place it in a world permanently. And then I wanted to have this vague idea that like the civic buildings like the train station, or the factory buildings, the ones that are of importance to the town but aren't necessarily people's residences and shops and that kind of thing, had their own kind of color story to them. Like it felt like anything that was in urgent need of attention, or like vital to the civic infrastructure of the town, was a certain color, and all of the residences end up being like a different, more muted or more natural feeling color palette. And this was like, if anything in this town is big and important, we paint it red. And that's sort of the way I've been doing the outlines for where I want all of the buildings to go, is reflecting that as well. Like I was using terracotta to outline where I want shops to go, and they're all yellow, and where the like personal homes are, they're all natural terracotta, they're all that kind of clay color. And then the big wind power plant that's going to be powering the town and the station, they're outlined in red. And so I'm trying to sort of work with that thematically, but then also figure out, is there a reason for that in the fiction of the world that I'm creating here, or is that just a convenient set of materials to gather? If you're trying to work with blue in the terracotta range, it skews purple because of the base color that it's being applied to. So I have to work a little bit differently when it comes to the lighter and bluer color palette that I plan on working with for the wind stuff. But for now, at least, I think it stands out really well, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the rest of the station building evolves behind it.
I'm glad to hear that you're going to be working with some blue and lighter colors too, because the little bits of turquoise with the copper in this build obviously really work well, because it's a kind of a complementary color to it. And obviously the blue of the packed ice along the monorail, that's probably going to be mostly hidden, I'd imagine, once you've kind of finished that up from a decoration standpoint. But just even the fact that it's there now really kind of lets you know, oh yeah, this would look really cool. I can see like a lot of like blue awnings or fins or sails or flags or things that might help complement the darker tones. It's going to be really cool to see I guess the industrial side of things, like not just the colors, but like the way things are going to work. I'm really curious to see how this is all going to come together.
Yeah, and for this, having put it down in the world, it actually occupies a slightly larger footprint than I originally expected, so I'm actually going to have to move around some of the like fans that are used as jumping pads with wind charges to get you to different places, and I'm rearranging a couple of things in the blueprint of the city. Aside from that, because I wanted to do some other sort of mindless activity throughout the week, I've started mining for more ancient debris, and I'm thinking about either incorporating the occasional, very expensive netherite block into the city's architecture somewhere, or working with the ancient debris texture as it currently is, because it's not only blast proof and kind of functional, but it also looks like scrap metal to me. And I've always wanted to build like a junkyard where cars have been crushed down and there are bits of ancient debris there as like, you know, bits of metal that have just folded and splintered outwards from whatever they were originally, like a car crusher, or like, you know, something that garbage compactor kind of cubic meters of trash just kind of left around in a big yard somewhere. So I want to grab a bunch of ancient debris for that. My TNT production in this world is not entirely up to scratch yet compared to the days when I was building a full netherite beacon. I don't have a dedicated gunpowder farm. It's all coming from a general mob farm right now, so I need to maybe adapt that or build another one somewhere closer to where I'm currently working so that it can work around the clock. And then sand gathering is another factor. Like, I don't really have a dedicated mining desert. I've just gone and mined from the nearest one, which is quite expansive, so I don't really miss too much of the sand being gone from there, but it took a lot of a pretty large desert to fuel the netherite beacon last time around, so we'll see how that goes. But when I've been digging out these ancient debris tunnels, the biggest obstacle I find is when you run into a ravine that in Java Edition below a certain level, they're always filled with lava. And so you can end up with a stretch of maybe 10 or 15 blocks where you have to chug a fire resistance potion and then build yourself a bridge through. But then if you're leaving TNT on the way back, more often than not, you end up just blowing a hole into that ravine again, and it becomes a problem the second time around. I've now started marking those out with magma blocks, kind of bookending each side of where I think the area of lava was, where there's lava kind of dripping from the ceiling. And if I spot one of those as I'm walking backwards through this tunnel placing TNT, I stop placing TNT there and only start again when I see a second magma block. And so far that's worked out pretty well for me. There's a couple of feeling out the range that TNT has and trying to figure out, like, okay, how far away do I need to stop placing things? But I'm finding it's making at least the resource-intensive part of that a little bit less so, because I'm not having to constantly brew fire resistance potions just to make it through one tunnel of a decent amount of explosive and ancient debris. So I've got a bit of that now coming down the pipeline, a bit of Minecraft bingo to kind of do a little bit of something different on the weekends, and it's been a busier end to the year than I expected, like I said, but Skyblock is still on the radar, so I'm hoping to hop into that either later this month or early in the new year.
Nice. I haven't thought about Skyblock in a long time. Long time. Same thing with netherite mining. It's not something that I tend to do a lot of, just because I don't use the blocks very much, and I have the netherite gear that I want. And like you, that was my least favorite experience of mining for netherite, is going through the lava ravines. And the fact that on a server that's 7 years old, like, you really have to go far afield now from our nether hub to try and find netherite. Like, it's not just underneath the surface. You really have to go for a trek. And if you die, or if you have to go back and get your stuff, like, it's a long slog. And sure, like, I mean, obviously we have potion brewers, we've got a community, farm for that kind of stuff, for fire resist potions on the server. And really all you do is just, like, Good Samaritan, like, if you take some stuff, you just kind of add some bottles or fuel, or like make sure that it's topped up in a way before you move on. But I do find that part of finding netherite tedious, and I've not really had much success. I find that the few times I've done netherite mining is like, all right, I'm kind of out of ideas right now on the server. Let's go get some netherite, or let's, gear up for the next. I think there were some changes to netherite that happened a few updates ago, and I was like, I need to go get my gear and get some extra stuff before this change happens, and this becomes even harder to get and harder to smelt. And I just remember having no luck. Like, I was just mining for miles trying to find netherite. I wasn't doing TNT mining. I guess that's the other thing, is I was doing like a more traditional kind of way of going through things. I just not my favorite experience in the game. But I'm glad that, as someone that's been in it for 7 years on one server, like, once I have my stuff, I really haven't had much of a reason to go back and get more, at least not anytime recently. That might change if I want to use armor trim or different armor as decoration around West Hill. Like, if I start going into the interiors and doing armor stands and like suits of armor on the wall, that kind of thing, I might end up wanting to go and get some different textures for armor trim. But we'll see how that all goes, because I'm far from finishing that up, at least where I am right now. I actually have been spending more time outside working on the two projects. I decided that I'm just going to kind of bounce back and forth between these two things. I have the abandoned farm, which I started landscaping, kind of like honing out what I wanted to do in terms of the tiers of the field last week. This week was more about the paths and getting the coarse dirt paths in along the walls, down to the river, figuring out where might be a normal natural place where there might be an extra path down to the river, or a path that might circle around, and then also connecting it to the adjacent farms and trying to make it like it makes sense, realizing, hey, there's a wall around this other farm, but it goes right up to the entrance of this abandoned farm. There would probably be a gate there, like neighbors might have like a way to kind of like go and say hi or something like that. So just adding in little things like that. And it's not even like I built a gate. I just kind of like made a space in the temporary cobblestone to say like build gate here in future, put bushes on the side of it, that kind of thing. And I really enjoy this process of not trying to build something 100% the first pass, like just kind of going in and sketching out the lines, sketching out the tiers, giving myself some time to percolate about what's going to happen there, and not spending a ton of time on something only to realize you didn't like it, you might want to move it. Realizing where I want to put some of the empty space. So rather than having farms just on top of one another, I want to have some patches of grass that are just like random bushes and shrubs in between the farms that just were unfarmable, too rocky, too steep, whatever they just weren't usable. And there is a cliff along the river that I think I'm going to use as like a nice natural divider between the two farms, because there's an apiary plan next to the abandoned farm. And that I have got no idea and no plan. So like I'm mapping out the edge of it and not really tackling the inside. I've messed around with some path blocks in there, but it's nothing permanent at all. It's all just a sketch. And I find that very fun. I find it very satisfying to just kind of like go in there, do some sketching in lines. Nothing is precious. You're just placing down blocks and doing surface level stuff, and then you can kind of move on. And so that's how I spent the first half of the stream this weekend. And then in front of the curtain wall on West Hill is where I also was spending some time. And I took some advice from, I think it's Donaraff was the person that commented on my YouTube channel about putting a stump. And I said, all right, well, I've done a stump before, and they're pretty straightforward to do when you're just doing a single stump, like a 1x1 tree like would grow in Minecraft, and then creating some roots and some different textures at the base and makes it look like it was cut down. I decided to try and do a 2x2 stump, which is difficult because if you do with regular tree blocks, then it's got four trunks, it looks like, at the top. So I used stripped spruce and some other blocks to make it look a little bit nicer. I think I used a pressure plate as well, some spruce planks, only because from a distance it needed some different height going on. And I find that I've used spruce slabs and stairs as roots pretty effectively in the past. And so this looks a little bit more weathered. I feel like it does kind of pass itself off as a kind of a larger stump. The idea was I didn't want to put a tree in front of the curtain wall because it wouldn't make any sense. I didn't want it to block the view. I also didn't want it to be like a perceived kind of RP security risk to providing cover for somebody attacking the town or providing access to the wall from a tree that was too close to the wall. And the idea here is that if there was a tree there, then the people of the town would have cut it down and gotten rid of it. Say like, well, we can't have that there. That's a bad idea. And so I've just left the stump there and just using things like muddy mangrove roots, soul sand, and some other like brownish blocks to kind of like intermediately suggest mulch or rough dirt or rotted wood, rotted roots, that kind of thing. And it works. It reads as I think it should, but of course it's only like 10 by 10 blocks of texture in a very large green space. So like it's successfully filled out a corner of it. And I find that I think this will be something I have to do throughout this space, is like I'm going to have to come up with some small ideas and kind of pepper them around rather than having one particular vision for this whole green space, because I'm still picking at it. There's still lots of empty space and I just don't know what is going to happen there yet. So I'm trying not to do it all at once. I'm trying to like let ideas come naturally and see where I might go with it. But so far I'm pretty happy with it. It's a matter of time and figuring out where I want to put things.
On the flip side, though, the stump idea is definitely something that you could take elsewhere. I think it's really fun to have stuff like that in your vocabulary when you're filling out a large space like this and go, well, if I want to fill out another like 10 by 10 area with just something, but again, the tree there is going to spoil the view of certain things. It's going to block the path view of the city or whatever, then you can consider putting stumps in other places, and slowly but surely you develop more of like a palette of things that you can pick and choose from whenever you've got those spaces to fill. So yeah, I think honestly there is an art to there being gap fillers in a world, as well as there being large set pieces and little things that help the world feel more conjoined. It feels fun to pepper that stuff in when it feels like you've got the space for it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I've been able to add a bunch of custom tree branches and now I think a couple of stumps to my kind of repertoire. And just like you know how to build a crumbled wall, or you know how to build a small bush section, or these. I really like these like thistle type sections that I've added in other places too, where I've kind of put azalea and acacia leaf blocks kind of like into the ground, and it looks like a different texture of grass when you surround it with moss and carpet and things. And I find that to be a very simple and effective way to line a path, create some depth, create some interest. I find that the tricky part for this area for me is that I really like the wall, and I really like the detail of the crumbled bits of the wall at the base. Like different pieces have fallen off. So I don't want to hide that. And so I have to deal with stuff that's fairly either low profile, low to the ground, or skinny, so that it doesn't really block like large sections. So I'll have to figure out what I'm going to do. But yeah, it's coming together, and it's one of those things that it's iterative. I find that with landscaping like this, a lot of it is just shooting from the hip. You kind of have to just do what you can when you're inspired to do so, and see how it falls. And the good news is that if it's that simple, and you're not building anything too large and too complex, then if you don't like it, it's not that hard to rip out.
And just judging by these screenshots, the stuff around it also has this level of detail that you're trying to meet, but it seems like everything else is going to make up for the fact that this area is like in low detail, at least until you've decided what you want to do with it. So yeah, progress getting made as always. Can't wait to see how it continues.
Thanks. Speaking of progress, we have quite a few little bits of progress on the road to the next release. Minecraft Java Edition 1.21.4 pre-release 2 was published on November 25th, 2024. The data pack version is now updated to 61, which includes the renaming of furnace, smoker, and blast furnace data. The fixed bugs are that burn time indicators of a furnace now are not working correctly after reloading the world. That's been fixed. Villagers trying to claim claimed beds has been fixed, and using items while sneaking slows down the player way less than in previous versions. Quick on the heels of pre-release 2, pre-release 3 came out on November 26th, 2024. A few more bug fixes. Some of those to note are teleporting large distances whilst gliding prevents the world from loading, and player model glitches. Waterlogged resin clumps do not drop when their supporting blocks are broken or moved, and player takes damage from jumping down from one block. Obviously, that is a bug that you want to squash. The release candidates for Java Edition 1.21.4, both for the release candidate 1 and 2 came out on the 28th, and then 3 came out on the 29th, 2024. That's all in November. The bugs that they squashed in these releases were related to Resin bricks appearing twice in mineable/pickaxe block tags. Spyglass is held incorrectly when used from the offhand. Updating can cause straight biome borders with the pale garden. JVM crash occurs when minimizing and maximizing the window, and villagers' iron golems detection range is increased for villagers upgraded from 1.21.1 or earlier.
The winter drop, as we've been calling it, finally has an official name. In an article published on Minecraft.net on the 27th of November 2024, The Garden Awakens has both a name and a release date. The Garden Awakens is coming on December 3rd, bringing with it an eerie biome, a watchful mob, pale blocks, and more new features, says the article. Venture into the Pale Garden during the day and you'll find it surprisingly quiet. Mobs don't spawn here, leaving you to mine for pale oak logs, pale hanging moss, and pale moss carpets in peace. But stick around after night falls and you'll see the Pale Garden awaken, with glowing eye blossoms blooming and orange eyes looming. The Pale Garden is home to the Creaking, an unsettling type of mob that'll freeze in place when you look at it and follow at terrifying speed when you look away. This mob also harbors a secret, because you can't defeat it just by attacking. Instead, you'll need to hunt down its creaking heart, hidden somewhere between the boughs of pale oak trees. Are you ready to expect the unexpected? Join us back here at Minecraft.net on December 3rd to discover everything you need to know about our 4th game drop, and perhaps a few other surprises too. If you want to read more and get a sneak peek at the Pale Garden, if you haven't checked it out in snapshots already, that's over at Minecraft.net. The Garden Awakens.
And we'll have links to all of the release candidate articles as well as the pre-releases in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com. I summarized and picked a few of the bugs. There really aren't that many. This stage of the game, they were kind of like quick fixing a bunch of stuff. Some of it were critical crashes. Some of it was more important gameplay. I just kind of picked the stuff that sounded more interesting to include in the notes. But if you're interested on deep diving into that kind of stuff, you can always go over to the show notes at thespawnchunks.com. I am surprised at a December release. I think it's a good release date. I think people are excited to get their hands on the Garden Awakens. But I think it also works out very well for the developers in case there are any additional bug fixes, things that have to happen in like a 0.5 or whatever. They'll have time to do that before the holidays in December and not feel pressured or anything like that. And I really felt like the pre-releases and the release candidates came fast and furious, true to form, immediately after we finished recording last week.
Yeah.
Just news started hitting day after day. But I mean, that's part because like we record on Mondays and most updates start on Tuesdays or later in terms of when Minecraft updates their stuff. And of course, once they get into the pre-release and the release candidate section of these development cycles, they're not beholden to Wednesdays. They kind of release whenever they can and need to. But December 3rd is tomorrow. So everything is going to happen again right after we're done.
Not to be that guy, Joel, but it's not even technically winter yet. So I'm glad they've changed the name. It's winter officially starts in the Northern Hemisphere on December 21st, so they are early for it being the winter drop. But they've now called it the Garden Awakens, which, I'm amused that they're doubling down on the garden thing, considering that was the most contentious part of it for players. But obviously, the Pale Awakens or something doesn't quite work grammatically. Either way, I think the new name is pretty solid. I think it, perfectly encapsulates it whilst not just calling it the Pale Garden update. I think they've gone with something that feels a bit more evocative and ties into the eye blossoms and the stuff that they added later on in the development snapshots. So kind of cool to see them, backing that up with the name of the update as well. And like you, really surprised by how quickly this came up. Like we said when they got into pre-releases, I was fully expecting this to be a winter in terms of we could push it to January or February, depending on how much more we want to get into this. But it seems like they pretty quickly found equilibrium with what the players want from this biome and what the development team is ready to deliver. And we've got it. And it's coming tomorrow. I think I'm excited for this update to reach the player base and for people to play around with it over the holiday break and maybe come back with fresh eyes and an understanding of how this is going to fit into the broader game of Minecraft in general. And more thoughts on that obviously in the main discussion this week. But yeah, I am, like you, very surprised that December 3rd is the release date for it, a lot earlier than I was expecting.
Something that's nice for us specifically will be the December hangout when we eventually record that, probably into the new year after the holiday vacation. Our community will have had basically a full month with the new update, and there's been some really cool builds and really cool use of textures in these hangouts, and to see everybody work with the new blocks and new textures from the Garden Awakens will be really, really fun. I also really like the title, and I think that one of the nice things about it is that Awakens is a very creative and evocative word. Like it's your creativity awakens, your perception of the world awakens. Like there's a bunch of things that I think that can kind of push players to be a little bit more creative and not treat it as just like specifically what Mojang and the marketing has focused on is the creaking, how creepy the area is, the challenges of dealing with the creaking, wanting to get your resin blocks and that kind of thing. But I think there's a lot more beyond that, and we'll get into that in the rest of the show as well. But like I think that it's nice that the title also evokes the, like, it's not just what it is on the surface. Remember that Minecraft players are going to do and come up with all kinds of different things to do in the Garden Awakens update.
Yes. I don't really have anything else to pull out of the changelogs and bug fixes and stuff. It all seems like fairly routine stuff. So what do you say we get into junk mail?
Sounds like a plan.
All right. If you'd like to email the show, of course, we're going to be answering a few extra emails this month, especially since we like to do a holiday mailbag towards the end of the year, and we also have a couple of episodes to pre-record. So get your questions in. spawnchunkmail@gmail.com is the place to send those. They don't have to be questions. They can be little ideas, as long as you keep them short and to the point. It helps us include them in the show more easily. Landed Puma has sent in the first email this week, the subject being Pale Garden Forest Fire. Hello, Pix and Joel. I think a good build idea for the Pale Garden biome would be terraforming an area to look as though it's been scarred by a forest fire. It may not look pretty to a lot of people, but I'm thinking of it in the same way that some people build volcanoes and turn rifts into earthquakes. The grey sky and colourless terrain would give the perfect atmosphere for the aftermath of a forest fire. I'm even imagining a slurry plain with red concrete spilling out, which would definitely grab your attention. For me, what makes the story of a world complete isn't always the buildings, but the world around it growing and changing. Forest fires aren't pretty, but they make the landscape interesting and dynamic. Land of Puma couldn't tell the difference between a creaking and Smokey the Bear.
I think you need to get your eyes checked, because I'm very familiar with Smokey the Bear.
One is a lot wider than the other one.
They do not look the same thing. I like the idea of a scarred forest from a forest fire, or even something more desolate like recreating Moria or something like that in a fantasy realm, in a region like the Pale Garden biome. There would be a lot of trees to remove, but if you have other projects in your world that are going to be requiring pale oak, then like that's a win-win. You create the desolate landscape and use the pale grass and the pale sky, and then you get the resources for something else, in another area, if that's what your plans entail. I do think there are some challenges to taking advantage of the Pale Garden, and I'll be curious to see what other people think and what you think about this as well, Pix. The desaturated skies and grass color are great. But I've found that in bouncing around in creative worlds, taking screenshots for the title cards of the podcast, I've not run into a Pale Garden biome that's been very large. They all seem to be relatively small. They all seem to be on cliffs or bordered by other very bright biomes like jungles and the dark oak forest. Which, granted, those aren't bright, but they're still very saturated. It's a deep dark color. It's a very green foliage neighboring it, and jungles are super bright. And so it's difficult to get that immersion unless you're like seeing this expansion of the forest fire or your desolate landscape kind of go to the horizons as best you can in your build. So I'm wondering if that's going to be a problem for the immersion. Now the good news is like the sky is going to change the moment that you get into the Pale Garden biome, so that's good. Also, the pale grass color is surface level. Dirt is still just as saturated. All the stone colors and stuff as you go down are still just as saturated. Not that it's a bad thing to have a lot of fun kind of, I don't want to say grindy work, but like detail work in a landscaping project is something that I like. So I wouldn't mind like finding a ravine in a Pale Garden biome that I was retrofitting into something else and realizing, oh, I have to go get rid of all that diorite and granite and maybe copper and other things that are sticking out as colors, and I want to go replace them. And that's fine, but you're going to run into that a lot depending on how deep down or how much topographical changes you want to add. You can also bring up blocks from below, like so you can maybe replace some things with deep slate or other gray blocks that are a little bit less saturated and have that work. But I don't know, for me, how successful a biome retrofit would be, given the size of the Pale Gardens that I've seen has been pretty small.
Well, the ones that I've seen, and I did actually load up the Survival Guide World Seed in the new snapshots, like in the most recent release candidate, just with a fresh copy of the world, not like the actual world that I use, but a one with the same world seed. And I went to where the nearest Pale Gardens would be. They're reasonable size. I think they stand out more because it's a lot easier to see where a biome begins and ends when it's such a dramatic shift in color. And so you don't necessarily think of the borders of a dark oak forest being as strong as the borders of a Pale Garden biome clearly are, just based on the leaf color. And so I think that's one of the things that makes Pale Gardens feel small by comparison, is being able to see the exact edges of the biome. I think the other thing is, yes, they are smaller, or I guess more circumstantial, because they are limited to basically being the dark forest equivalent of what a meadow biome is to plains. It's a variant that occurs at a higher elevation, and that's why you mostly find them on hilltops. Like, I think that's the way they've been programmed to occur, because otherwise they conflict with where you would typically find dark oak forests in sort of basins and stuff, and they didn't want to add them as their own biome because it really feels like every dark oak forest transitions into a Pale Garden. You never find a Pale Garden in isolation from a dark oak forest. And maybe that's by design too. Maybe that's like making sure that they are clearly a variant of this and making it look less like there is just some kind of weird graphical error here, that you have something to compare it to that's of a similar biology. Or maybe it's an area of dark oak forest that's becoming corrupted in whatever way. But like, I agree. I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the way they've done that because it limits where the Pale Garden can generate and how it generates. But I wonder if it maybe just play tested better internally. I'm wondering if perhaps it's just easier to escape the Pale Garden as an environment if it's on a hilltop, because then you can clearly see where your exits are once you're towards the edge of it and not surrounded by the stuff that's meant to obscure your view. And you don't end up running into like cliff walls and stuff in an attempt to escape from the creaking if you decide you need to leave in a hurry. You can get out to a hillside and go, oh, okay, I can just hop down on the tops of the trees to escape, rather than it being something where you're trapped in a valley and funneled into a location that you can't get away from. Because of it being this spookier biome and having these enemies which are actually fairly difficult to handle if you get into a tangle with them, I think it's maybe like it play tested better internally for that to be the case, for it to generate on a hilltop where your escape routes are a little easier to access.
I could see that. And there are other biomes in the game too that have such a harsh line, but for whatever reason it seems to work better. And it's probably because, like you mentioned, they don't appear to be a graphical glitch. Like I'm thinking about a desert. Like whenever a desert bumps up against anything, desert next to
Badlands with the orange sand versus the regular sand, and like that's a very clearly delineated line.
Yeah, but because they're both colored, it seems like, well, it's just Minecraft as opposed to a weird, graphical experience. It would be really cool if you luck out and get a dark oak into a pale garden, as we mentioned, they come together next to something like a winter biome. Whether it's a mountain, whether it's a ice spikes, even like to really have like that gray lifeless leaf next to a snowy biome would be really, really cool. I don't know that I've seen a pale garden high enough in altitude where there was snow on the leaves, because that would also look really neat. And like it could be also a fun build idea for people too. But yeah, it'd be curious to see. I guess to the point of making like a forest fire zone. Biomes, as per our discussion last week, talking about chunks, like the chunks go all the way to the world height. So like you're going to have that sky color and that grass color all the way to whatever height you want to build at in a pale garden. So if you're already up on a high hilltop, like maybe using the height to your advantage could also be something too.
And I mean, the biome itself would stay present regardless. So you could cut down a hilltop if you wanted it to be at floor level with the rest of the forest too. Like
that's true. Yeah.
You can landscape that to your satisfaction. The only thing that doesn't move with those, I think, is because the creaking hearts can't be pushed by pistons. So you'd have to regrow a bunch of pale oak trees without the creaking hearts in them. And then if you wanted the creaking, you could probably craft your own from resin, right? But yeah, like in terms of the forest fire idea, I think it's great to see ideas coming through for the Pale Garden that aren't just spooky. I think it was announced and sort of play tested around Halloween, so a lot of people just had like, oh cool, we can build like a graveyard here or some kind of like spooky area, and like it felt Halloween-y just by association. But then now we've moved out of that and into a more festive period. People are thinking of like, well, what does this mean for us the rest of the year? I think it's interesting to see what people are going to do with this biome when it's a mainstay of survival worlds and not like the newest shiny new toy. So I'm kind of curious to see what other ideas people have for building in that area. I think the forest fire one is really creative and definitely makes good use of the sky color. Definitely feels like, the grass color around can feel kind of like ash has fallen without you really having much else you can do that with. Like you could throw in some concrete powder and whatnot, but I think honestly the pale moss used liberally and the natural grass color in there feels like the grass is having trouble growing because there's a certain amount of ash and debris has fallen in the area and everything's burnt. Like I think that could work really well. You could even start using the resin and if you want to go more volcanic with it almost, you could end up using like resin and shroom lights and magma blocks the way I've used them in the past to create like lava flow and stuff in there without it being actual lava. And there's more options that can come from within the biome itself in that respect, which I think is kind of fun.
Our next email comes from Winged Wolf, Pale Garden Day versus Night. Hi, Pix and Joel. I am very excited about the Pale Garden biome, but like you, I have noticed that it is a bit boring. What if it stayed the way it is, dull during the day, but at night things sort of came alive and glowed orange? This could apply to the quote-unquote tendrils of pale moss carpets and possibly the hanging moss as well. I would love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for the great show. Winged Wolf died because she was transfixed by glowing moss and didn't see the creaking behind her. Slight note for listeners, this is an older email from October 20th, which is before eye blossoms were introduced. So they kind of had this idea of wanting more orange things glowing at night before that came into the game. Still something I think was worth discussing, because I agree. I do find that the Pale Garden is a little bit dull for me. And I was holding out hope that they would add more to the biome. I like the idea of it staying kind of dull during the day, but then having a night really change everything about it. Like I know we have the creaking that come out at night and the eye blossoms change, but I like the idea in general of a biome, whether it's the Pale Garden or not, changing dramatically at night. And it makes me think of Avatar. When Jake Sully is walking through the forest, which is already pretty vibrant, but it changes dramatically at night. The whole place just lights up. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing for the Pale Garden, but it's an interesting concept for Minecraft, I thought.
Yeah, I think the difficulty I'm having is getting over the word boring, because I think the average forest in Minecraft is not especially exciting inherently. Like, I think the excitement to be found in any forested region in Minecraft is just, what resources can I get here? Am I able to clear out an area and build something? Or am I just here to harvest the trees and get a couple of saplings and then go and regrow the stuff somewhere else? I don't know if it is the job of biomes themselves to inherently be exciting as a closed system, as their own independent experience. I feel like there is still plenty to be said for what you can do with a biome outside of that. And, the previous email having the idea of, like, what could I turn this biome into? I think if it's bland, that sounds to me more like this can be a blank canvas for other ideas, or just a resource mine that you can grab stuff and take it elsewhere. As far as the amount of features that are now present in the biome, if you compare them to something like cherry groves, I don't think anybody said that cherry groves were inherently kind of bland or boring, but they've added one wood type, one leaf type, and one flower, which is admittedly a very powerful decorative flower because of the amount of, orientations that you can place them in. But the Pale Garden adds one flower with a variant, so technically, I guess, two flowers, a new wood type, a new leaf type, an expansion of moss, new moss carpet behavior, a new mob, a technical block, the resin block family, and a new armor trim, all within that one biome. Obviously, you have to extract a lot of stuff from the biome in order to get access to some of that, but I think the biome itself is not inherently boring. I think people just have such an issue with the color palette being very muted and almost monochrome. As an environment, we don't see that much elsewhere in Minecraft. I think the only other place that's comparable in terms of the lack of color is something like Deep Slate Caves. And there you're looking for the stuff that stands out from that, right? You're looking for the shiny ores, you're looking for the other biomes that suddenly add this influx of color and life, like Dripstone Caves and Lush Caves. Even the Deep Dark starts to feel like more interesting color-wise than just being in a cave surrounded by deep slate and blobs of tuff. And so I kind of wonder how much of what we consider bland in this case is down to deliberate decisions made for the fact of players being able to transform that stuff themselves and encouraging players to make an impact on spaces that they feel are, bland. I won't say uninspiring, because the whole point is inspiration. It's just inspiration coming from a different place. But I wonder if it's that plus the limitations of the game's visual effects. People want there to be ambient glow to things and probably more ambient sound, and a lot of that stuff can be misleading mechanically even as it adds to the game's aesthetic appeal. And so I wonder how long Minecraft can really consider fighting against people wanting it to be more visually rich, and how much they have to start leaning into that as a development direction.
Yeah, I agree. I think that boring, and I've used it as well, I think that it's maybe the incorrect way to describe what you're feeling when you're going through the biome. I think dull is what really kind of comes out there. And I don't want to kind of define the difference, because I think it's visually dull. I don't think it's dull from a gameplay perspective. I think there's a lot of possibilities. And I think that really it's like how if you go on a hike and it's a beautiful forest, and like it's just a forest, there's nothing going on there, but it's visually interesting. There's a lot of contrast, there's a lot of green, there's a lot of bright colors that humans find appealing and uplifting a lot of the time. And then you go into the Pale Garden in Minecraft, and because the game does not, as you say, have enough for visual effects, like there's not a lot of atmospheric fog stuff going on, there's not a lot of lighting that you can do without shaders. And so unfortunately with that combined with a 16-bit texture game like Minecraft, like it's going to be kind of dull. It's monochrome. And I don't envy the devs trying to do this, because it must be really limiting to what you can accomplish without the graphical fidelity and the tools that, say, the developers of Elden Ring would have. If they want to give you a very spooky, very threatening experience in Elden Ring, it probably goes a lot farther than what you're experiencing in Minecraft in the Pale Garden, right? And I think that, by having those limitations, unfortunately, a lot of people are just picking up on them and going like, yeah, it's dull. And I think that it's unfortunate that it's just a very difficult thing to get across. I like the idea of a more dynamic flip. Like you can accomplish the whole dull and creepy thing either during the day or during the night, depending on how you want to do it as a developer. But I do like the idea of it changing, and they hinted at it with the eye blossoms, opening at night versus being closed during the day. And I just think that they could have gone a little bit farther with that, with either mushrooms on trees or just some other kind of thing. I like the idea of having some complementary colors in there as well. Like I think way back I had suggested the idea of orange, like mushrooms on trees, kind of mimicking the eye pattern of a creaking to kind of like throw you off. I think the eye blossoms do a bit of that because of like the topographical changes that we mentioned earlier, where these forests are usually on hillsides. The eye blossoms are not all one level. Like they kind of some of them are higher than others. So you can kind of mistake them for a creaking sometimes. But I feel like if there was just another color in there, it might help, especially if it wasn't visible during the day and it indicated something at night, where it was a turquoise glowing moss or just anything. I think could have been a fairly straightforward addition without making it be something that would be requiring gameplay to be added. Like it just could be a visual thing. But then, I mean, to counter my own point, like you run into the problem, like, well, what if you want to take that moss or that thing that's glowing out of the biome and use it somewhere else? Is it also going to glow at night? Like if you use it to decorate your castle wall, when night goes down, is that biome specific? Is that something you can do in the game, or does it have to be block related? So like I don't really know, because the things that they've done in the biome are like surface level things like grass texture, which we already know is biome dependent, and then sky texture, which is all again biome dependent. And so the blocks tend to be the same when you move them. And that goes to like what you said about like the features in there. They have to be what you expect them to be in other biomes. Otherwise it becomes landlocked. Like if the blocks and items that are in the Pale Garden only behave a certain way, and will do that everywhere, then you become limited as to how you use them. Whereas if they act like other Minecraft blocks, then it's a lot more versatile, right?
Yeah, I'm curious if the transformation is something that they can expand upon mechanically in future, because I don't know if there are other examples of this really. There are definitely animated textures in the game, but I can't think of any blocks that are intended for something other than a technical purpose that have a distinct state change in the way that something like eye blossoms do, or perhaps the creaking heart does. Like a lot of the stuff that has a state change is stuff that's meant to be interacted with by the player and doesn't do it naturally. But if you look at the creaking heart turning on and off, detecting whether it's day or night, or if you look at the eye blossoms opening and closing, the eye blossom technically becomes a different block. It becomes a different flower, and you can harvest it as a different flower, but when you place it down, it's open to that state change. It can either open or close. I think that's kind of fascinating, both from like a biological perspective for the Minecraft world, but also from a gameplay perspective. And if they had, let's say, a forest where you walked in and it was a normal color, but at night the trees shifted to that white color, and it was more like a binary state change between the two, would that be more effective? Would it be like you didn't know you were in the Pale Garden until suddenly at night all of the leaves changed color? Would that be a more effective experience? And like, I think it's something that they can start to push the boundaries on a little bit. Obviously, players look for biomes as being something static so that they know where they're going to get what they want to get. But also, from an experiential point of view, I wonder if there is room for them to have these transforming elements to future additions to the game that could be used in a variety of ways. It could be something that blooms into an incredibly colorful new plant as opposed to something that's just designed to creep people out. But I feel like this is the first time where they've really played around with a block becoming another block without any kind of player interaction with it. And I wonder if that's a concept that they've been wary of in the past because it can be powerful if used for certain gameplay mechanics, but could also be a really interesting direction for future updates.
Well, one of the things we thought would be fun to talk about today would be our plans for what we are going to build when the Garden Awakens hits our respective Minecraft worlds. And I know you, without any mods on the Minecraft Survival Guide, can roll right into the new update when it lands. So what are your plans?
First of all, find the biome. I think I'll probably end up trimming chunks for it because I've flown over a lot of my worlds to get to the Windy City area where I'm building now. It's quite distant from my central spawn location. So, yeah, I'm thinking about finding a decent sized pale garden somewhere and really just getting into the mechanics of it. Naturally, with Survival Guide being tutorial focused, I'm going to talk about how to interact with the creaking, how to avoid it. There's probably just going to be a lot of sleeping involved, but then finding resin, finding the creaking heart, and then what you can do with that. So, if anything, I'm looking forward most to experiencing the technical side of things. I want to do an experiment with pale moss, using that for moss mining, because I know that that's going to be effectively the same thing as mining with regular moss, but without the azalea saplings springing up everywhere, and seeing if that makes moss mining more efficient because you're dealing with fewer different block types. Is it going to be better for the amount of stuff that you have to compost, or do you get less return on your bone meal because there are fewer things to compost? And like there's a few variables in there that I think could make it really fun from a technical perspective, seeking out pale moss if you want to remove a large chunk of terrain like I've done in the past for various projects. I want to get hold of the creaking heart to farm some resin. I've already got a couple of fairly effective farm designs in mind. Using the creaking heart as an on-off day-night sensor is going to be possibly better for counting days for those enderpearl teleporters that I've been working with than using a daylight sensor to detect whether it's like full daylight or not. Could be. And then, yeah, like experimenting with the creaking and the creaking heart comparator signal from the detecting the distance that a creaking is from its origin is a really interesting concept. So you could do a lot with that and eye tracking and stuff. So I think, if anything, the first place I'm going to go, I mean, aside from just the biome itself, is to a technical place. And then from there, the building stuff, obviously I'm excited for new block palettes, but that's going to stretch out into long-term projects for me, where the short-term is just digging into the technical side of things and finding out what makes it all tick. How about you? What's the first thing you plan on doing with pale oak or any of that stuff on the Citadel?
Well, pale oak is my biggest draw to the biome, and I'm going to be pulling a Choppin' Tuesday out of my
Yes.
hat, and probably going and finding the biome, as you said, and just saying like, all right, well, hopefully I'll find one that is in a place that's not really going to be problematic. You know, I might try to find a small one that people just won't really care much about, and just ransack it. Like, I'm just going to try and grab as much as I can, and then not have to worry about going back, so I can use it creatively in West Hill. I mentioned earlier that I'm working on an abandoned farm, and I think that most of the textures in pale oak are going to be good for it. Like the pale oak planks are good for like sun-bleached roof parts that are crumbling away. I may even, speaking of forest fires, I may even make it look like the farm had burned down, and that could be really fun. And I feel like the pale oak log texture, like the actual log texture on the outside, does kind of have that scaly kind of burnt wood look. It depends on how dark I want it to be. So I'm going to play around with that for sure. And I also really like the stripped pale oak logs, and I think that I might be able to use those inside to have some white columns, maybe in the keep. Like, none of the bigger places like that in West Hill have been decorated, so like to have something fancier inside that doesn't clash with my existing palette as much as quartz does, or calcite. Like, they tend to be more outside blocks, or quartz is just very warm, and I've got a lot of grays and browns and things like that. And so I think the pale oak strip log could be a really kind of good substitute for like a painted wood beam as opposed to like a fancy stone beam, which might be just a little bit too fancy for my current aesthetic in the West Hill area. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that there's going to be some great uses for a different roof color. I mean, when you've been building in an area for 4 years and you're trying to come up with a new roof for a house, like trying to not do something you've done before just for your own entertainment is challenging. So now I have like, some white blocks I can use for trim, for rafters and beams and things like that. So that's going to be a lot of fun, I think. I have yet to really think about what I might do with resin. Right now, off the top of my head, there are a bunch of nether tunnels that just are unfinished. And they're always kind of like little side projects if you want to take a break from what you're doing and go, fill in and decorate another tunnel. A lot of the stuff we have is just like non-thematic. It's just colors. If it makes sense to put something orange in a tunnel, then maybe I could use some resin bricks for that. I do like the block of resin, so not the bricks, but the other texture.
Yeah.
And I feel like I might be able to come up with a cool idea for that in the sci-fi area I want to build, whether like it's an energy thing or a highlight block or something, a vat full of weird alien goo. Like, I don't know. There could be a bunch of uses for it. I think you mentioned like using it for like magma or lava, as an alternative texture. So like that could be kind of fun too. Coupling it with honey. Speaking of honey, actually, not the resin blocks, but the resin texture that you can place down, similar to glow lichen, like that kind of a texture topper. I do have plans to make a honey mead distillery in the basement of the keep once I move my existing storage area out of there and decorate it and kind of like be done with it and move away. But it's the last thing I'm going to do. And I'm wondering whether those resin textures can be mixed with honey or acacia to kind of look like spilled mead or sticky substance on the floor or on the walls. Like, you can put it anywhere. So like I could really maybe come up with some fun ways to texture something and have some nice bright orange colors kind of like telling a story in the basement of the keep against like the dark, dull, tough and cobblestone walls and things like that. So I've got some ideas. A lot of it is going to be experimenting, seeing what it works well with, that kind of stuff. And from a technical side, my moss farm that I have, the way that it works, it's a stone generator, and it does use the azalea saplings, the moss, and the grass that grows on top of the stone when it's bone mealed next to a moss block to create more bone meal to run the farm. But rather than making a pale moss farm, the way that my farm is set up, because it's an El Mango design, I can just take out one of the moss blocks and add in a pale moss block. And then that section will just start making pale moss. Mm-hmm. And the same kind of idea applies. It'll split some, it'll turn it into bone meal. The rest of it will go into storage. So really, I don't have to make a new moss farm. I can just add a pale moss block or two to my existing moss farm. What I will have to do is just change the filters on the storage system. So right now we've got like 6 double chests or something or more of each thing. And I don't think we necessarily need that. I could maybe rearrange the filters to be like, well, we'll have a row of moss, a row of pale moss carpet, that kind of stuff. So, and all of those blocks can be kind of derived from pale moss. So I'm not too worried about it. I don't think there's a way to get the hanging moss unless you're at a pale oak biome, a pale garden biome. So that stuff will have to be either manually, or we'll add like a bone meal farm where like you have like an observer that like hits bone meal and uses shears and things like that. But that's kind of like more like an as needed basis, the kind of thing like you maybe do it for 5 minutes and have enough hanging moss to last you a while. Because I'm curious about how hanging moss might work in some of the darker parts of West Hill. We've got the taiga biome on the west side, and I've used a lot of moss and a lot of spruce and a lot of stuff like that. And it would be kind of cool to have some hanging moss from the trees, just kind of like the I can't remember the technical term, but it's like a lichen moss that I see in North America all the time that kind of hangs off of trees when I'm on hikes. And that kind of stuff could be fun for just atmospherics and fun little details.
I'm trying to remember what you can hang pale hanging moss from. I know it generates under the leaves and so forth, but I wonder if you can hang it from underneath like dirt blocks and other organic blocks like that, because it could fit really well with hanging roots if you wanted like a cave environment for it, that kind of thing. There's a few things like that I think would make it worth farming just for aesthetic choices in organic looking builds like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think I'm excited for the build palette opportunities as well. I've had this empty patch in the center of my storage room for a while, that anytime I go in there, someone's like, yeah, that square there is still like grass and stone, and I'm like, I know, I just haven't thought of what exactly I want to build there yet, whether it's a logo, whether it's just like a different type of wood floor. And I've used stripes of wood elsewhere in the floor, but they sort of divide out into the 4 different arms of the storage building. And so I'm thinking maybe I just floor that with strip pale oak logs, and have that be like the central kind of, nice clean square of the stuff in the middle. And I also now need to figure out where to filter pale oak and resin, like where they go in the slices of my storage system, which I temporarily at least left some gaps in, so that if new blocks came out at a certain point, there would be like, there's a buffer, there's like room for it. And there's some filters that are currently unoccupied. So I've got a little bit of space in there. But yeah, like there's a few options with decorating with pale moss, with decorating with the hanging plants, and I think resin, like you, I'm not 100% sure on. When you were talking about using it around the mead distillery, though, I love the idea of just using resin. You know how honey will drip from a full beehive or bee nest? Like the honey particles will start dripping from underneath. Like even if you find them out in the wild and they're full of honey, just putting a single like resin clump down there would look like the honey had been dripping for a while and it maybe like solidified into some kind of hardened thing under the tree. So you could do that if you were building custom trees and leaving a bee nest up in there. You could maybe have that be there as well. There's some fun ideas there, I think. But resin, for me, I can see resin bricks working best in the nether. They feel like a nether block already, even if they don't originate there. They have the same texture as the nether brick blocks. They have a similar color palette to the other warm colors you find there, like lava. So while blocks of resin, to me, feel more versatile because they feel more organic and you can put them in a lot of different places, the contrast present in the resin brick block means that it's going to be suited to very specific, stark contrast kind of purposes. And I think that's probably where it fits best, is in a place like the nether. But we mentioned earlier, talking about the Windy City color palette and the other colors I was planning on working with there. Working with blue and white makes perfect sense when we're talking about the element of air and wind and everything being themed around wind power and also the breeze. And so white wood makes perfect sense to include in that palette at some point, whether it's just to have another white texture to work with in like pixel art designs, if I wanted to build a statue to the breeze somewhere and have it look like the same texture as the mob itself, or if I want to take those colors, that kind of grayer, white, blue kind of color range, and use that to build inspired by the breeze. Even just having white leaves, I think, is going to be nice to have options for texturing, that kind of stuff, and even taking those into a town that feels a bit more wintry and being able to do stuff like that when, on Java Edition at least, we can't have leaves covered by snow that then turn white the way they do on Bedrock. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for white material to enter the existing range of white material and like find its niche in the color palettes. So I think I'm looking forward to Pale Oak just as much as I am any other aspect of this update. I think I'm curious about the technical side of things, but like I said, long-term considerations for building are going to be definitely putting Pale Oak on the table.
It's funny, it just dawned on me now that we're into December, like having a white palette for the folks that do Christmas builds. Like if you do Christmas villages, if you do stuff on a server where there's like a build challenge and you need a white block, like man, you got a boon of textures coming in that you can play with now, especially with the leaves. If you're doing like a winter scene on Java, to play around with that would be really, really cool. Going down like the idea of what you're talking about with the white blocks around the Windy City, I feel like just in general, lighter blocks in Minecraft tend to look like they weigh less. I mean, it does depend on the texture, because like quartz to me still, I think like it's a heavy block because it's quartz, and we all know quartz is rock and rock is heavy. But having the white wood, it reminds you of like bone being lighter, or the ribs of any kind of flying machine would be made of a light material, not a heavy material. And so using the white wood or the pale oak rather to create the structures of things that have either sails or fins or fans or whatever would kind of lend itself to your build having some lighter than air qualities to it from a design and color perspective as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I can imagine doing a lot with that. Even just like there being clouds, I've seen people try and build clouds out of stained glass and stuff like that before, and I sort of
Hmm.
wonder if you wanted to turn the in-game clouds off and have more control, or even building a natural diorama, if using stripped logs for that is going to make more sense than using bone or quartz or other stuff like that. I'm curious to see what inventive uses people will find for it that hadn't occurred to me in the moment.
Yeah, there's always an interesting time when you get new block palettes and stuff that come out to players. And like, I always think, in terms of what I'm building as a current project, because my projects are so long term. And then I'm always surprised when I see people from our community, people from the greater Minecraft community just share these like really unique ideas for textures. Like I think about the kind of examples in Cyberpunk. That's like it's a really difficult thing to do in Minecraft, and yet people can do it so well because they can just get outside of the box and use textures in ways that they are probably were never intended to be. Really see things from a different angle. And I'm curious as to, especially with like you said, the resin bricks and some of the other more peculiar textures from the Pale Garden, as to whether that can be used. What's the Creaking Heart has a couple of very specific textures. I'm curious what people might come up with for that too, right? Like I think I've seen it used for tire tracks. I've seen it used for scars in the earth. That kind of thing could be really, really fun to see what people come up with. With regards to the resin bricks, something I was thinking about when you were speaking earlier too in the Nether, you could use it in a way to kind of suggest the idea of light. You were talking earlier about like gradients and different things you're doing in your Windy City, and I was thinking about how I recently just built a kind of a melting pot at the bottom of my iron farm. And it's not large enough to do this because the inside and the outside walls are only the 1 block thick. But if you had a large enough build, you could use like nether bricks on the outside and then resin bricks on the inside. And the inside would look like it would be glowing hot, made of the same material, but it would just be you using different colors to evoke that idea rather than lighting, which doesn't really work that well in Minecraft as far as atmospherics or anything glowing unless you've got shaders. And so having those bricks in there, you could have the inside of something look like it's red hot.
Yeah, like for heat mapping textures, I feel like it's definitely in the hotter range. So yeah, I think that makes a whole lot of sense. I'm sure our audience will have plenty of ideas for what they're planning on doing with the Pale Garden as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Once again, we're looking for more email to be submitted over the holiday season so we can fill up a mailbag and do some community-focused episodes. But for this episode, that's where we're going to wrap up this one. We're going to find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today over at thespawnchunks.com. So check out there if you want to get links to any of the stuff that we discussed in the news or any of the other bits and pieces we've mentioned on the side. The music for the show is composed by me, and the Spawn Chunks is proud as ever to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any level gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it every month, every week even, so you have plenty of opportunity to listen in and get the news before it goes out to everybody else. We also have monthly hangouts. The next one of those is kind of up in the air, depends when we'll be able to schedule it towards the end of this month or the beginning of the next, but stay tuned for announcements on that and when we're going to be recording our catch-up shows that go out ahead of the holiday break. We currently have 301 patrons, which is down 6 from last week as Patreon's still processing stuff rolling into December, but we'd love to welcome more people in for the festive season. Special thanks go out to our content engineer patrons, that's Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. Just tell a friend about the Spawn Chunks and where they can go to listen to it. You can find us on social media at the Spawn Chunks. New episodes are available on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and on YouTube in video version if you like to watch your podcasts as well. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is at Patreon at patreon.com/thespawnchunks, and that's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where the Minecraft Survival Guide is currently in its 3rd season. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, doing behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series and playing other games from time to time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. And aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Links to everything that I'm doing online can be found at joelduggan.com. That includes the Citadel Cafe, where I'm talking about Arcane with my friend Stephen ESC. We have finished season 2, and the series in general is finished, so we'll be talking about that on the next episode. You can follow me on social media. Very easy to find, Joel Duggan, Joel Duggan on Twitch as well. Currently streaming Tuesday through Saturday, bouncing back and forth between Minecraft and Satisfactory. Looking forward to adding a couple of other games into the mix over the holidays, so keep an eye out for that. And Fixmas is an event that happens in Satisfactory. It's seasonal, it's Christmas related, so instead of building space elevator parts and sci-fi stuff, you can actually build Christmas trees and Christmas ornaments and candy canes and stuff. So I think I'm going to be checking that out and seeing how much fun I can have with that over the holidays.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and the Garden Awakens tomorrow.